London, in the spring of 1814, carried an air of restless celebration, as if the city itself were exhaling after decades of war. Carriages rattled over cobblestones polished by rain, lanterns flickered atop wrought iron posts, and every salon, club, and ballroom seemed to hum with triumph over Napoleon's retreat. Yet for Lady Eleanor Harcourt, 23 and cornered by the invisible judgments of society, the festive roar offered no comfort. She walked through Carlton House that evening with her chin lifted in precisely the angle her governess once taught, poised, serene, untouchable, though her heart remained anything but. Behind every glittering cluster of guests, she felt the tug of a presence she did not wish to acknowledge. Her former suitor, having returned to London in disgrace, had already made 2 attempts to corner her, and she sensed he would not stop until he forced a confrontation. Eleanor had endured his accusations before, claims that she had ruined him, that her refusal had cost him alliances, that she owed him restitution. Now he sought to reclaim dignity at her expense, and she knew the danger such a man posed in rooms hungry for scandal. The night's reception drew the highest ranks of the aristocracy to celebrate the Prince Regent's diplomatic triumphs, yet Eleanor felt trapped in a maze of ravenous smiles. Lace skirts swept past marble columns, footmen carried silver trays heavy with crystal, and music floated down gilded corridors, but none of it soothed her tightening breath. She kept close to the edges of the crowd, hoping to evade her pursuer, but fate seemed cruelly fond of corners. She caught sight of him, broad-shouldered, face arranged in an eager imitation of innocence, threading through the throng with deliberate purpose. Their gazes met. His narrowed into a silent accusation. Her pulse jumped. Without waiting for courtesy or courage, she slipped into the nearest hallway, praying no one noticed. The corridor offered a deceptive calm. Carpets muffled her footsteps, portraits observed her with the sternness of long-dead royalty, and the distant music faded until it seemed the world itself held its breath. Eleanor pressed a hand to her corseted waist, struggling to steady herself. How absurd, she thought, that in a palace brimming with humanity, a woman might feel so terribly hunted. She took another step, and heard his voice behind her, low, sharp, and far too close. Eleanor. That single word carried every ounce of bitterness he had gathered since she escaped him a year prior. She did not turn. Her only answer was motion. She hurried down the corridor, choosing a direction at random, her slippers barely whispering across the floor. The late Duke's portrait loomed to her right. She felt the echo of his stern gaze urging her onward. At the end of the hall stood a door, ornate, polished, and mercifully unguarded. She reached it just as her suitor's footsteps quickened. The moment demanded no deliberation. Instinct ruled her trembling hand. She opened the door and slipped inside, closing it swiftly behind her. Darkness met her first, softened by the faint glow of a fire dying in the hearth, followed by the unmistakable scent of sandalwood. She exhaled, relief and dread warring within her. Only after her breathing steadied did she realize she had entered a private chamber rather than a sitting room. Her mistake settled like ice in her stomach. She turned, preparing to flee again, when a quiet rustle of fabric met her ears. Alexander Lennox, Duke of Ashford, stood beside a tall mirror, the lamplight revealing the sharp lines of his face as he paused in the act of fastening his waistcoat. Barely dressed, startled, and impossibly composed, he regarded her with raised brows. He was 29, one of the regent's most trusted advisers, feared in political circles for his clarity of thought, admired in social ones for his disinterest in frivolity. Eleanor had never spoken more than 2 civil sentences to him in her life, though she had observed him often enough to know. Eleanor hesitated, but the sincerity in his expression disarmed her. She accepted the handkerchief, feeling the warmth of the fabric. Before she could speak again, a muffled gasp echoed from the corridor. Someone had seen her enter. The gravity of that realization struck both of them instantly. In a house teeming with gossip, the sight of an unmarried woman entering a duke's chamber could ignite a scandal impossible to extinguish. Alexander's expression hardened, not with anger, but with swift calculation. "We must leave separately," he said. "If we exit together, the matter becomes truth rather than rumor. She nodded, panic pricking the edges of her composure. He crossed to the opposite door that led to a discreet passage used by senior staff. "Go now," he instructed. "Turn left at the first corridor. You will reach the main gallery unnoticed." Eleanor stepped toward him, then paused, compelled by an instinct she barely understood. "Thank you," she murmured. "I did not wish to drag you into any impropriety." His gaze met hers with quiet intensity. "Impropriety finds us all eventually," he said. "But I believe tonight it found you unjustly." She slipped through the door he indicated, her heartbeat still uneven, the monogrammed handkerchief clutched tightly in her palm. As she disappeared into the dim passage, Alexander remained where he stood, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade. Something unspoken lingered in the air between them, an invisible thread drawn taut by a moment neither had anticipated. In the silence that followed, he fastened the last button of his coat with deliberate calm, yet his thoughts were anything but orderly. For reasons he could not yet explain, the fear he had glimpsed in Eleanor's eyes unsettled him more deeply than the threat of any whispered scandal. And so the night continued, brilliant and treacherous beyond the chamber walls, while two lives, previously distant, carefully controlled, shifted imperceptibly toward an intersection neither had foreseen. Winter settled over London like a veil of crushed silk, muting the city's edges beneath frost and chimney smoke. A year had passed since Eleanor Harcourt fled into the Duke of Ashford's private chambers, and though London scarcely remembered the incident, Eleanor had lived each day with its echo. The scandal had not erupted, thanks to the Duke's swift intervention, but whispers had followed her long enough to make her withdrawal from society seem both prudent and inevitable. Her family's estate in Surrey became a sanctuary where she relearned how to breathe without fear of every passing gaze. There, she tended the gardens her mother once cherished, read until candlelight dimmed, and pieced together a version of herself unshaken by a man's outrage or a ballroom's scrutiny. Time gave her resilience, though the memory of the Duke's steady voice and the handkerchief he had pressed into her palm remained tucked in the quietest corner of her thoughts. When she returned to London that winter, she did so with caution, but not timidity. Her aunt, a determined woman who believed dignity was less a birthright than a discipline, guided her through each re-entry into society. They attended small teas at first, then modest gatherings, until finally Eleanor found her composure restored in full. It was at one such gathering, a parliamentary salon hosted by a viscount's politically ambitious wife, that she met Charles Edgewater, a rising member of Parliament favored by influential circles for his eloquence and restraint. He was not brilliant in the ostentatious way some men were. Instead, his intelligence revealed itself in measured phrases and thoughtful pauses. He treated Eleanor with a courtesy devoid of calculation, and she found in his company a rare sense of ease. Their acquaintance grew steadily, and soon even the Prince Regent had remarked upon Edgewater's promising match. Thus, when the royal winter ball at Carlton House was announced, a lavish evening meant to dazzle foreign envoys and reassert Britain's post-war grandeur, it was Charles who requested the honor of escorting Eleanor. She accepted, not out of romantic conviction, but from a quiet gratitude for his unwavering decency. The night of the ball arrived with snow drifting over the palace grounds, softening the lamplight into a gentle haze. Carlton House, illuminated by thousands of candles, appeared almost weightless against the darkness. Eleanor stepped out of the carriage, her gloved hand resting on Charles's offered arm. Her gown, a pale silver blue, shimmered with each icy gust, creating the impression that she had stepped directly out of winter's breath. Inside, the ballroom unfolded in a spectacle of polished floors, soaring mirrors, and crystal chandeliers that refracted light like scattered stars. Musicians tuned their instruments. Guests arranged themselves according to rank with the subtle precision of a choreographed dance. Eleanor felt a loyal flutter of nerves but steadied herself with a practiced breath. She reminded herself that she had survived greater trials than the scrutiny of strangers. Charles guided her through the crowd, introducing her to political allies and foreign dignitaries, each exchange polite, succinct, and mercifully unremarkable. For once, Eleanor felt she could move freely through a London assembly without bracing for catastrophe. Yet fate, with its unfailing fondness for symmetry, rarely allowed peace without disruption. Across the ballroom, Alexander Lennox entered with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to both admiration and suspicion. His role as advisor to the Prince Regent required constant vigilance, and months spent negotiating delicate diplomatic matters had sharpened his already formidable presence. Tonight, he wore his title with effortless discipline, responding to greetings with measured bows and speaking in tones that suggested both authority and fatigue. He did not seek attention. Attention sought him. He was conversing with a Prussian diplomat when a flicker of motion caught his eye. Turning slightly, he saw Eleanor Harcourt step into the full glow of the chandeliers. For a suspended moment, he forgot the diplomat, forgot the noise, forgot every political burden he carried. Eleanor's presence was not merely unexpected, it was arresting. The last time he had seen her, she had been frightened, breathless, clutching his handkerchief while fleeing a danger she would not name. Now she looked composed, luminous, and altogether transformed. Yet something in her carriage, some quiet resilience, echoed the woman he had met that night. He did not realize he had stopped responding to the diplomat until the man cleared his throat pointedly. Alexander excused himself with a curt nod. His focus remained fixed on Eleanor as she moved through the room. When their eyes met, the music faltered as if the orchestra itself had been caught in their silent exchange. Conversations paused, not out of malice, but from the instinctive curiosity of a society forever starved for intrigue. In truth, nothing scandalous had happened, no word spoken, no gesture exchanged, yet the air between them vibrated with the unmistakable charge of recognition. Eleanor felt the weight of his gaze before she fully saw him. When their eyes finally locked, she experienced a brief, disorienting flash of the past. A dim chamber, a dying fire, his steady voice urging her to safety. She had imagined their reunion countless times, each version dignified and calm. None had prepared her for the intensity of the moment. She inclined her head in a controlled, polite acknowledgement, then quickly turned back to Charles, who regarded her with quiet concern. "Are you unwell?" he asked gently. "Not at all," she replied, though her pulse disagreed. "The warmth of the room caught me by surprise." Charles did not press further, though his gaze drifted briefly toward the Duke. A thoughtful crease appeared between his brows, but he masked it with his usual composure. He escorted Eleanor toward a group of acquaintances, yet even amid the polite chatter, she felt Alexander's presence like a shift in the room's temperature. She knew she could not avoid him entirely. Society did not permit evasion that obvious. And so, when a moment finally arrived in which he approached with measured steps, she summoned the composure she had rebuilt so painstakingly. "Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing. "I had not expected to see you returned to London so soon." His tone was formal, courteous, but beneath the surface ran a current of something unspoken. Eleanor curtsied. "Your Grace, I assure you, my return has caused no disturbance." Charles, standing beside her, offered a polite greeting. Alexander returned it with equal civility, though his attention remained focused on Eleanor. The orchestra resumed, and the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, wrapping around them like a tightening net. "I trust your year has been restful," the Duke said, choosing his words with care. "Restful enough," Eleanor replied. "I hope yours has been productive." He allowed a faint smile. Productivity is rarely the same as peace. Their exchange lasted mere seconds, yet Eleanor felt as if they had peeled back a layer of time neither wished to expose. Alexander seemed poised to say more, but restraint, ever his ally, held him silent. Charles gently guided Eleanor away, offering her a chance to escape further tension. She accepted, though not without sensing that something unresolved had taken root the moment the Duke saw her again. As she walked toward the refreshment table, Eleanor brushed her fingers against the hidden pocket of her gown. There lay the monogrammed handkerchief she had kept despite telling herself countless times to discard it. She did not remove it, nor acknowledge it aloud. But its presence reminded her that the past, though quiet, was not finished with her yet. Across the room, Alexander watched her in a manner too subtle for gossip yet too intent to be ignored. The night was far from over, and both of them seemed aware, whether they wished it or not, that the delicate balance they had maintained for a year had shifted irrevocably. Snow swirled beyond the windows, muffling the world outside, as if urging them toward a reckoning neither had sought but both could no longer avoid. The gallery was quieter than the ballroom, though faint strains of the orchestra drifted through the corridor like echoes from a distant dream. Eleanor stepped away from the crowd, grateful for the brief solitude. Portraits of monarchs watched her with the unnerving solemnity of centuries past, their gilded frames glinting in the torchlight. She inhaled the cool air, hoping to steady the disquiet that had unsettled her since the Duke's arrival. Yet the stillness only made her thoughts louder. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece during her year away, but tonight she found those fragments shifting once more, as if they recognized a truth she had tried to abandon. She had scarcely taken 2 steps deeper into the gallery when Alexander appeared at the opposite end. He did not approach immediately, as if offering her the opportunity to retreat should she so wish. When she did not move, he crossed the distance with deliberate calm. The severity of his expression softened only when he came close enough to see the tension around her eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of silence between them was not hostile but heavy with a residue of what had been left unspoken since that night in his chambers. "I owe you a conversation, Lady Eleanor," he said quietly. His voice carried neither command nor presumption, only a sincerity that unsettled her composure. "I would not intrude upon your evening unless I believed it necessary." She folded her hands to keep them from trembling. "Your Grace, I do not think any conversation between us is necessary. The past is past. We each survived it." Though her words were steady, her heartbeat quickened, betraying the strain beneath her calm surface. Alexander stepped closer, though still at a respectful distance, and regarded her with a mixture of regret and determination. "You did more than survive," he replied. "You endured shame that was not yours, and you bore it alone. That is a truth I have wanted to address for a year." His tone deepened with a gravity she had rarely heard from him in public. "When you entered my chambers that night, frightened and chased into a circumstance not of your making, I should have done more. I should have asked who pursued you. I should have ensured your protection extended beyond a single escape route." His words struck her harder than she expected. She had not realized until this moment how deeply she had needed someone, anyone, to acknowledge the fear she had felt. "You owe me no apologies," she said, her voice thinner than she intended. "I was the one who intruded. You acted with more kindness than I deserved under the circumstances." He shook his head slowly. "Kindness was not what you deserved. You deserved safety. You deserved truth. And you deserved a man who did not allow circumstance to silence what he felt." The last line hung between them with a startling intimacy, and Eleanor felt her breath catch. She stepped back instinctively, though not from fear, rather from the sudden clarity his confession brought. "What you felt," she repeated. The words escaped before she could weigh them. Alexander's gaze did not falter. "A year ago," he said, "I withdrew from a growing attachment because I was told a political alliance required my loyalty more than my heart did. I allowed myself to be persuaded that personal happiness was a luxury a man in my position could not afford." His jaw tightened, a sign of frustration directed at himself. "The alliance collapsed. The marriage I was urged to pursue did not come to pass. And yet the one consequence I could not reverse was losing you before I ever allowed myself the chance to choose you freely." She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself against the sudden whirl of emotions. When she spoke, Her voice was low but clear. Your Grace, I cannot be comforted by a confession delivered so long after its use. If I was not worth the risk then, why should I believe I am worth it now? Her honesty was sharp yet dignified, a shield forged from the hardships of her exile. He exhaled, the sound barely audible. Because I was a coward then, and I refuse to be one tonight. The fervor in his voice was restrained by propriety but unmistakably real. I sought to speak with you long before this evening, but you withdrew to Surrey, and I respected the distance you kept. When I learned you had returned, I intended to give you space still, until I saw you tonight and realized that I would rather endure your rejection than continue in silence. His candidness unsettled every defense she had built, yet she could not surrender her dignity, even in the face of such earnestness. You speak as though I am free to return such sentiments, she said softly. But I arrived tonight on Mr. Edgewater's arm. Alexander nodded, a flicker of pain crossing his features. Yes, and I respect him. He is a good man. But does he hold your heart? The question was gentle, not accusatory, and it struck with disarming precision. Before she could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Charles emerged from the far end of the gallery, his expression calm yet edged with something like resignation. He had seen enough to understand the nature of the moment he had walked into, though Eleanor and Alexander both straightened instinctively as he drew near. My apologies, Charles said quietly, addressing Eleanor first. I did not mean to intrude, but I thought it best I speak plainly, as the situation appears to demand it. He turned to Alexander, offering a faint, respectful bow. Your Grace. Alexander inclined his head. Mr. Edgewater. Charles's eyes returned to Eleanor with a mixture of fondness and clarity. I have suspected for some time that your heart lay somewhere I could not reach, he said. I hoped it might change. I hoped I could earn what was not freely given. But tonight has shown me that it would be cruel to pretend otherwise. His voice tightened only slightly as he continued. I care for you deeply, but care is not possession, and affection is not a cage. Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude for his generosity, followed by a pang of guilt she could not voice. Charles offered her a small, sincere smile. Choose what brings you peace, he said simply. You owe no one a sacrifice of the heart. He gave a final nod to the Duke, then departed without theatrics, leaving only the soft echo of his footsteps behind him. The gallery fell silent once more, though the air seemed charged with new possibility. Eleanor turned